All right, ciao bello, welcome to Team 33. So we're going to be doing a little Italian striker special at the moment, something we've chatted about outside, myself and Ronan Mullen, who is sitting here. He's our in-house trequartista, to use an Italian term. Yeah. We're also joined by Jonathan Higgins, who is our regista, a position that Liverpool have not filled since Steven Gerrard left the club after, well, when was it, 2014-15?
Yeah, his demise has been in a while. He could have played in Serie A towards the later end of his career.
And Colm Boohig, who is going to be our in-house fantasista. That's not an insult. Fantasista actually is a good thing in Italian rather than the translation for fantasist. So.
Thank God I was Googling here straight away.
So what we were going to do actually, and this blew up on Twitter when we tweeted out that we were going to talk about, I suppose, Italian strikers from the golden era. So we're picking kind of the 1990s and then into the 2000s as well. So, early 2000s, because that's the era I grew up in, and also coincidentally the era of Gazzetta Football Italia. So to start off on actual players, what I wanted to start with was the players who've shown loyalty. And given that Batistuta is probably the person that everyone's talking about, that's the best place to start. And there are certainly 2 goals that jump out.
Yeah, well, much like any conversation, I always try and bring it back to Gabriel Batistuta because I do love the man. But I tweeted out the goal last night, possibly a bit hyperbolic, but it's probably my favourite goal ever. Just everything around it. The Old Trafford for once was like a cauldron atmosphere, and he just kind of took the air out of the balloon with this ridiculous strike. And it's apt that the De Gea quote-unquote mistake at the weekend, because it was deemed to have gone down the middle of his goal. This one right down under the crossbar. And I don't think you'd really blame Mark Bosnich because it flew past him at the speed of light. But Gabriel Batistuta, we hear this thing, YouTube footballer, it's thrown around a lot these days. He was like the pre-YouTube footballer where my dad used to say to me, oh, this guy's unbelievable, he's an unbelievable player. And he probably never seen him play like maybe 3 or 4 times. But like there was this cult around him, or mystique, which is obviously absent now because any striker or forward player, Gabriel Obertan springs to mind, where you know, you Google him, YouTube him, he's sensational, then you see him in real life and he's not so much. So those kind of factors play into why I love Batistuta.
Yeah, he's a £3 million bargain over 10.
That Man United goal, actually, it's even better because of the headband, which was proliferated around Italy in that period as well and just looked good. The Arsenal goal, I thought, also from that angle.
That's my perfect favourite. Like he gets the ball and it's like you think he has no chance here, and he plays the ball to the right and then arrows it top in the far side. Incredible. Like it kind of makes me giddy. Like I was watching back YouTube videos all weekend. I just forgot how much I used to love the guy as a kid. It just like when this conversation happens, I was like almost the kind of the showstopper. It's Batistuta, that's it, move on next. He really was an amazing striker, and it's always, I can't help but talk about him with a sense of regret because I'm a huge Liverpool supporter, as I think everybody knows at this rate, but Liverpool were heavily linked with him through the middle of the 90s. Roy Evans, I think, tried to sign him a number of times, and can you imagine partnership of him and Robbie Fowler in the Premiership? That would have been just amazing. So it's always one sense of regret, but what a fantastic footballer.
He leathered that ball like he was angry with it all the time. I mean,
I think the description on Twitter that I think it's a fella called Cahill, so hello Cahill for sending that in, but essentially he hits the ball like the ball's insulted his mother, I think was the...
Oh, that was it.
Actually,
that was
it's a perfect description for
it. But that Arsenal goal, the way he just touches it out of his path and Nigel Winterburn is done. And it's within the second time in a few months David Seaman was done with that type of shot. Giggs was a few months earlier on the other side, where just out of nowhere this top corner effort.
But how many of Batistuta goals, like you spoke about the going goals down the middle are high profile given what's happened at the weekend events, but so many Batistuta's goals were just that spot under the crossbar. He just leathered them. And
actually there's an even better goal, and it actually goes down to the loyalty thing. So obviously sorry.
Crazy talk.
Yeah, no, but he obviously, he left Fiorentina for Roma and went and won the title. Now, he actually scored against Fiorentina in that season, so the 2001 campaign. It's a 30-yard volley, straight past the keeper. The only thing, obviously, he doesn't celebrate it. Like, he scored this fantastic goal, but then he looks so distraught, and it's just it's one of those moments. Especially he went down with them with Fiorentina in 93-94. So, and he decided to stay, which is actually going to be a theme that we'll come back to with others. But given that, like, you can just tell what attachment he had. And obviously the fans love him as well.
His quotes after that game were kind of very much revealing just how much. It was almost like he killed a family member or something like that. He was absolutely distraught because he went through the full evolution with Fiorentina. They went down, came back up, and then they went trying the big push and even bring in Giovanni Trapattoni to try and make one big push, and it just didn't happen, and he had to go almost reluctantly. And then the quotes after that are just kind of sum the guy up, I think.
But he was always different. Didn't he cost something like 23.5 million as a 30-year-old when Roma signed him in 2000, won his first title at that age? But also, did I hear he wasn't even the biggest fan of football? He was excellent at it.
He's into polo, basketball, everything that isn't football. I think golf potentially as well. But he kind of
that makes me love him more.
Yeah, no, but like when I saw the quotes first, I thought he doesn't like football, and he said, no, he kind of that was almost a paraphrase of him, because what he said was he was so driven to succeed that he was almost frustrated by it. Like if he didn't score another goal, if he didn't get another win, that's what he didn't like, as opposed to not physically enjoying the sport.
But there's a dichotomy there as well, because he was ravaged by injuries towards the end and in subsequent post-football life, where his leg might be again hyperbolic, but he was saying that he might not need to get his leg amputated. But it just shows someone who doesn't love football wouldn't necessarily put themselves through the pain barrier to such an extent that they would require that. So I think it was a bit of I don't think he was fully behind that.
I just think he was excellent at it and enjoyed being excellent at it, but probably was just take or leave the sport as a following in general.
But his celebration, I always have the picture in my head, the kind of big oversized Florentina shirt, the hair kind of everywhere, sometimes the band, and this big celebration after smashing the volley. That's kind of when I think back of football as a kid, I think that's what I think back. But I was thinking about it earlier today as well. I don't think we can really have this conversation without touching on it. He isn't really a striker, but he's one of the reasons why I fell in love with Serie A. Is Paul Gascoigne moving to Italy brought on that famous Challenge 4 and programme, and kind of opened up, because it's without going. You famously kind of described your old man symptoms in last week's Team 33 show, but without going all manish. Football coverage back then was a total different radar. Back then you got match of the day, you got an odd FA Cup game here and there. This brought football into our living rooms and as a kid, and brought so many special moments, and one of the reasons why I fell in love with Batistuta and so many other strikers we will talk about.
In terms of the loyalty as well, obviously Totti, you can't, I've actually got to see him once in the flesh for about 8 minutes. A famous game, Roma versus Parma. The one time Rome flooded, and I happened to be there to watch a game, and they called it off after 8 minutes, but I got to see Totti. He's one, but the other one that actually jumps out, because Totti never got relegated, that would have been a challenge to see whether he would have stayed at Roma his entire career had they ever gone down. But Del Piero and Trezeguet actually, and what a partnership as well. They both went down to Serie B after all the what would I describe it, shenanigans.
Del Piero's career was cut in two halves really, because he had that injury in 1998 and he lost that bit of spark and pace, but his technique never abated, and he was a joy to watch. And I suppose he was the quintessential player that maybe people this side of the world in the UK and Ireland looked at as like a brilliant Italian striker, because the name flowed naturally and he was just such a beautiful player. And the tie, not so much the game, but the two legs that stuck out for me was 2003 Juventus Real Madrid in the semi-final, and his performance in those two games, especially at the Bernabeu, was for me like quintessential Del Piero. And of course his goal at Old Trafford against United as a United fan.
I don't know how long before this gets a mention.
He did win Capo Cannonieri, and it's a good story as well. So 2007-08, so Juventus are back in Serie A after said shenanigans, and himself and Trezeguet are on 19 goals going into the final game of the season. Del Piero, I think, gives Del Piero scores the first goal, and then he's up to 20. Trezeguet's on 19. He decides to give a penalty that's been awarded to them to Trezeguet, so they're both level on 20, and then Trezeguet returns the favour. So, two absolute legends.
I saw him actually play for Sydney FC at the very, very end, Del Piero, and even though he could barely run at all, just the class of the guy, the first touch. He's a first touch player.
Just
one of those ones.
Class,
unbelievable.
My favourite fact about Del Piero is he won the League of Ireland Goal of the Month competition when he scored against Shamrock Rovers. But it's an interesting parallel between himself and Totti, because Del Piero during his phase of at Juventus was winning plenty, whereas Totti was in a similar situation, yet not winning very much. There was kind of a case to be made that Del Piero was in the best possible position. Granted, there was other teams competing, but Roma were always a ways off, and even when they got close, they didn't always finish the job, which makes Totti staying there all the more remarkable. But if he had flitted away towards the end of his career, Buffon has made that decision, even though he came from Parma and there's stuff behind that, but he's always a Juventus player, whereas now he's got this sort of end game in his career that might diminish things ever so slightly, whereas Totti, even though he was linked, there was never really heavy rumours that he was ever going to leave. And Daniele De Rossi, who was, I think he came quite close to joining Man United and a couple of other teams. I don't know what it is about the Roman vibe that they just seem so unwilling to.
And the next one, Florenzi, is probably going to be the next one on that line, who's going to be there for his entire career. He's a good bit younger, so obviously there's time to change, but it looks like he'll be staying. I mentioned the word Capo Cannonieri, which of course means top scorer in Italian football. Can't really talk about that without Beppe Signori. Obviously, you mentioned Lazio and Gaza.
Yeah.
He was the guy that was actually finishing off any of the chances on the rare occasions that Gaza actually played. Won Capocannoniere 3 times, 93, 4 and 96. And I was just watching footage, like his left foot is a wand, even though he pretty much scored all types of goals with both feet, head, etc.
And a guy who helped Gaza settle in Italy, or settled for a little bit anyway, and just seemed like an all-around gent. And I get that from Gaza in Italy, the book that you had
with Daniel Story.
Daniel Story on, and I chatted to Daniel about it too, and it was Signori kept him coming up constantly about a guy who was just so welcoming to Gascoigne to help him. But as you say, what a footballer, and was winning these individual awards when Lazio weren't necessarily the dominant team or anywhere near it at a very, very strong time in Italy. So that just goes to show the class of the guy. And again, another one of those players who just oozes class, like you were saying there a second ago, Del Piero. And there's so many of those in that era, which is like, if you just think about it now in hindsight, and it had that air of mystery too, because it was just before the YouTube generation. So we're just talking about our 4 of our memories from it, which makes it even more special.
Only 23 caps as well for Italy, which is mad.
So many players like that.
7 goals, which given that he was top scorer 3 times in the 1990s, it's kind of like a Matt Letizia situation. Maybe not quite as stark, but
definitely
enough. Yeah. The other one I'm going to bring up actually is Dario Hubner. So he looks quite odd. He's got a kind of massive black curly hair, this goatee as well. Came late to football. So you're going to, I suppose, if there's an example, it would be Glenn Murray, except if Glenn Murray smoked a pack of cigarettes a day. And he played for Brescia at one time and then moved on to Piacenza. So it's 2001-02. He's joint top scorer that season. But an incredible goals record, and it wasn't just a one-off season. He'd done it with Brescia before, had been relegated with them, had spent most of his career in the lower leagues, and then suddenly found himself scoring regularly at the top level. And also there was a period where Pirlo was playing behind him at Brescia, and Baggio there as well. And Baggio, of course, you know, what a player.
There is that famous first touch that Baggio has when Pirlo's ball over the top for Brescia. Just one touch taken around the goalkeeper, and he momentarily loses track of the ball when it comes down. A bit like the Bergkamp Leicester touch, but you could watch that and repeat all day on YouTube.
Yeah, actually it was Trezeguet, I think, that year actually that Hubner shared it with. But bringing up Baggio, actually, he's one of those cases, and it seems to happen a lot in Italian football, where you play for at least 2 or 3 in his case, or the big 3 as well, which is remarkable. You know, he was there at Juventus from 1990 to 95, and then he went to Milan for a couple of years, and then to Inter, which is hitting all 3.
Yeah, it's obviously something not unique to strikers, but you see it a lot with Christian Vieri going from playing for both Milanese.
Christian Vieri is well known to be prolific on and off the pitch, let me just say that.
It's just, we'll leave that there. And the thing about these totemic strikers, I don't know if it's a thing in this part of the world or just outside of Italy, where it's seen as the defensive place to play football, low energy, whereas there's these, as I said, totemic strikers throughout the 90s. I don't know what it is, like it's like defences were seen as units, and then these lads were like shining light that actually brought a bit of flair, made it your money's worth in these drab 0-0s.
Yeah.
So that's another interesting element of it. And then you see all these players in later career who try to resurrect themselves in the Premier League. Vincenzo Montella springs to mind. He came to Fulham very briefly, shone ever so brightly, and then as soon as he could get back, he was gone. But
there's a few of them that kind of used the Premier League as a retirement home. Well, in some cases retirement home, or in other cases to try and revitalise their career. So Vialli, of course, Hullet, if you're counting him as a type of forward. George Weah was at Chelsea and City, I believe, for a little bit. There's Silenzi, who he was a bit younger, but trying to revitalise his career maybe, or just a move anyway. Went from Torino, where he'd actually scored like 17 goals in one season, and then ended up also moving to Nottingham Forest, where he scored 0 goals and is not remembered fondly. I think he's kind of known as one of the worst signings that the club ever made. And also Dennis Bergkamp, which I think is an interesting case, who failed in Serie A, and Ruben Sousa as a name that jumps out.
There's some sort of, I don't know if you've read the book David Winner did with Bergkamp, but it's just this acrimony between, it's almost unspoken between the two of them, Ruben Sousa and Bergkamp, where they both want to occupy the same positions. It's something you see in football all the time, but it's never as clear as laid out in this book, where Ruben Sousa, his name comes up over and over again. Bergkamp, someone who failed in Italy, probably for the reasons I mentioned, where it was such a, probably more stilted than the Premier League was at that time, where when he went to Arsenal he was allowed to flourish in a team where, and Bergkamp was always this outlier where a lot of Dutch players were going to Milan at that time, and he said, rather than go there, I'm going to go to Inter. So he was always a bit of a contrarian on that side of things.
Yeah, because we spoke to Richard Hall of the Gentleman Ultra about that period, why Bergkamp failed, and it was down to the fact, obviously, as you said, the style of football didn't suit him. Also, his teammates didn't like him, not just Sousa, but I think they found him kind of cold and unapproachable. Yeah, aloof. Also, in my ear about a couple of minutes ago, Enda Kol, who is a regular on the main show, suggested Shevchenko. That's him waving there, and that's who I was pointing at earlier. It wasn't just doing that randomly. Shevchenko, of course, two-time Capo Cannonieri with Milan, moved in 1999 after a great season with Dinamo Kiev. I think himself and Rebrov used to have this wonderful partnership.
They destroyed Barcelona at the Nou Camp that year with Kiev.
Yeah. And of course, he ended up at Chelsea, but I think that's tainted what was actually a superb career. I mean, 24 goals in his first season, I think it was, something along those lines, which, given, Italy's a tough league to move to in the first place, even and especially at that time, it's remarkable.
Yeah. And Fabrizio Ravanelli is another one as well. When he went to Middlesbrough, I thought that was going to be it. And then came back and he won the title under Sven at Lazio, I think, wasn't it? Did he? I think that was the year he went back. But when he was finished at Juventus, looked like that was going to be the end for him. I mean, he always looked old anyway with his style. But he went back and had the second part of his career. And his honours list is really impressive because he was there for the peak of Juventus.
With Vialli as well.
Yeah.
And also kind of young Del Piero being there, Baggio being there a little just before the Champions League.
And then he got the double that Lazio got, and they haven't repeated it since in 2000 or Sven.
Yeah, a lot of deep squads also when you actually kind of look at it as well. I mean, you take the Inter era where Ronaldo was there now. Obviously, he was injured for quite a while. Didn't really get to play with Vieri. Now, that would have been a strike partnership. If they'd both been fit in and around the same time, would have been amazing. And then you throw in Zamorano was still there, which is a great story as well in terms of fitting players in. You remember the shirt number he would have had. So Baggio had also arrived, so let's throw another great player in. A couple of years later, I think Robbie Keane.
And Robbie Keane, for 6 games.
Not remembered as a classic striker in that sense, but actually was rated as one of the best young players at the time. But Baggio comes in, has to have the number 10. He's just moved from Juventus where he's just let it go to Del Piero. Ronaldo was wearing 10 at the time and then obviously had to move to 9, which left Zamorano, who had been wearing 9 at that point, to put the number 18 on. But there's a little thing in between the 1 and the 8 that he decided he'd throw in.
Amazing. Unbelievable.
1 plus 8.
Yeah.
It was just crazy, wasn't it?
Madness. But when you look at some of the other kind of deep squads as well, Roma's strike force, actually the year they won the league, was unbelievable actually when you think about it, because they had Abel Balbo, who'd been one of their stars in the 1990s, had come back, but he didn't really get to play much. You had Totti, obviously. You had Montella, Del Vecchio, who had a good record of scoring in Rome derbies, and then I'm forgetting somebody as well. Batistuta, yes, the great Batistuta.
The man after all that money, we were full circle.
10 minutes. But the other thing as well, I think tactically, why a lot of these teams were able to fit so many players in and not have like 2 million unhappy players sitting on a bench. You have the trequartista, which I think is yourself, playing in that kind of number 10 role, floating, and then you have the 2 strikers as well. So it wasn't a case of now where you can't have 4 strikers like what Man United would have had the year they won the Champions League.
That's it. That was that time. The late 90s and early 2000s was a time for really deep striking squads. And Lazio, when they won the league in 2000 as well, they had Salas, Boksic, Mancini. I had to write this down beforehand because I was going to forget Simone, Inzaghi, Ravanelli. Like, that was just the strikers. But nowadays, I suppose the quintessential number 9 is not dying off, but it's definitely becoming less regular because it's kind of like an attacking third now, and everyone's in, like, it's quite fluid in the front 3 and everyone's moving around constantly. You get the exceptions like Harry Kane coming around every so often. Even Harry Kane likes to drop deep, but that was a perfect time for, like you say, the 10 behind the 2 up front.
Yeah, and Inzaghi's actually an interesting story as well. I was looking at his Wikipedia profile. It says he was born in Piacenza. I don't think that's where he's actually born, though. He was born offside.
Hey. I was wondering where he's going with
that. That was terrible. And terrible reaction. Actually, I didn't realise at the time, but apparently him and Del Piero never saw really eye to eye towards the end of their time at Juventus, because obviously he goes on to Milan, has further success, goes and wins Champions Leagues, but they weren't passing to each other apparently around 99-2000, which was...
way.
And didn't really seem to see eye to eye off the pitch as well, which is I suppose another kind of interesting point as well.
Maybe he was annoyed by his excessive celebrations every time he scored from 2 yards out.
Yeah. The other thing actually that jumped out to me, a few adaptable Germans as well. So one capo cannoniere, Oliver Bierhoff, who gets forgotten a bit, and Jurgen Klinsmann, who didn't win top scorer, but Klinsmann's well remembered at Inter. Obviously he was there at the very start of the 90s because he learnt German. It's kind of like what he did at Tottenham as well. He did that dive celebration. He was a German coming to England, which is not always the most popular thing, but he endears himself. And Bierhoff, having spent, surprisingly, I would have thought his career would have taken him to the Bundesliga first, but he was at Ascoli for a few years, then goes to Udinese, becomes Serie A top scorer, and then goes to Milan, where he helps them win the league in that first season in 98-99, because they'd had a few bad years, and which leads me to a period further back, George Weah.
I was just thinking that goal against Verona, I mean,
his goals record's not especially,
I know, but
mad, or at least brilliantly crazy, but it's just obviously the Verona goal kind of wipes everything away.
That's the thing about that period, because it's so nostalgic that you look back and you forgo all the like average records, especially for like wonder moments like that. But that was an absolutely ridiculous goal, that Weah goal.
Yeah, I remember when he came, I think it was Vialli was still the manager at Chelsea when he came on Chelsea on loan. I remember just being so excited to see this guy, and I think what it kind of summed up the memories I have of him is just incredibly talented, could literally shimmy the ball either way, could turn on a sixpence, but probably should have scored a hell of a lot more goals and should have been a lot more, probably had more talent to be even better than it was, but you still have, was one of those players that goes, wow, George Weah, here we go. But yeah, and another cult hero.
Of course, before Weah as well, because he was in, I suppose, a long-term sense, replacing arguably probably one of the top 5 strikers of all time, Marco van Basten. So,
yeah, and I mean, that was one of the cruelest endings to a career, the premature nature of it, but he'll always have Euro 88, and that, like, so many of his like fellow great strikers cite that as the best goal they've ever seen, just because of how ridiculous it was to even shoot from there. Like, the start to show the Batistuta Arsenal goal was almost irresponsible to shoot from where he did, and went in top corner.
I'll give you another example of somebody who, but it wasn't in Serie A, unfortunately, but it was when he went to Atletico Madrid with Vieri. There's one where he scores.
Unbelievable.
There's no way he should be scoring from where he is, but he's actually literally on the sideline. The goalkeeper is obviously not in the goal, otherwise would have been the worst goalkeeping mistake of all time, but he actually curls it in from an obscene angle.
Yeah, it makes Canu's effort at Stamford Bridge seem quite average. Yeah, it is ridiculous.
By far, yeah. But certainly, like, it's a pity, yeah, as you said, it's a pity. We never got to see much of Van Basten in the 90s after, I think, 92-93, where a Basil Bowley tackle from Marseille was well, he'd had a few ankle injuries, but that seemed to be the kind of death knell of his career, unfortunately. And like, I didn't really get to see him live. I've just had the look of YouTube and etc.
Still has a goal named after him, which is it's incredible. You just remember that goal or that type of volley. So
There was a few at Parma. Sorry, go.
No, I was just going to say, probably without preempting your next question, but comparatively now, is there a dearth of attacking talent in Europe, or is just that Serie A is no longer the hub where all these brilliant like musicians get together and perform? It's like, it seems they're just scattered around Europe more so. Is that the case, or do you think there's a reason why there's an absence of?
Well, obviously Serie A was kind of the top leagues, and I guess in one way we didn't really touch on the real Ronaldo properly, but I mean, he was at Barcelona, obviously, where he scored a great goal against, I think, Compostela, it was. And then he's brought on a world record fee to Inter. And actually, when you look at a lot of these strikers, most of them went, even within the league itself, for world record fees. So you had these very wealthy owners. They're obviously trying to, in a very competitive league, maybe in a way that the Premier League is if maybe more teams were involved in the title races. But they're all seeking that title, and they all have that kind of belief that maybe they can do it, maybe with that great striker. And I think it's that kind of case that they were just able to amass the best talent in Europe, bar maybe one or two exceptions that played in other leagues.
Yeah, even from the Premier League's perspective, it was seen as the Zenith is playing in Serie A.
Yeah.
And like, everyone had such respect for those players, and even as a United fan, when Italian teams came to Old Trafford on a Champions League night, you'd be terrified. Nowadays, not so much. And yeah, it's moved elsewhere, and it's just not in Italy at the moment where the power is.
Yeah. Now, the Premier League was able to pull a few players. We mentioned, obviously, there's the ones that use it as a retirement home. I think Crespo was a bit stronger when he was at Chelsea.
Yeah.
He wasn't completely at the tail end of his career. Tino Asprilla, a very different story.
Ruined Newcastle's title, but still, it was what a party.
What a character. Someone to go on a party with.
Oh my God. Yeah, there's that story when he signed, the day he signed for Newcastle, they were against Middlesbrough, and Keegan brought him for a champagne reception, had a little like glass of champagne, and was on the bench later that day, and came on for a little cameo, but didn't really affect his performance because he played like it was a party all the time. And when that finished, I know we're talking Italy, but that finished against Liverpool outside the right foot in the first 4-3. It's one of the best Premier League goals I've ever seen. Asprey was a joy.
Another honourable mention, and actually to think about these Roma teams with great strikers, but Antonio Cassano, a wasted talent, but there's some great stories, not so much from Roma where he seemed to fall out with everybody eventually, but Real Madrid where he had extracurricular activities in his hotel room, but he also made friends with the bellboy, so that person would actually send up like croissants after he'd finished the business he was doing within the said hotel bedroom. But he's some character. Like he's one of those I thought would never play in a World Cup, but fortunately, although it wasn't a great one for Italy. Just to finish off, I guess, and even to mention people like Simone Inzaghi is one we never really touched on too much. Marcelo Salas, another. I think did he terrorise Man United
in the Super Cup?
In the Super Cup, I remember.
Yeah.
But
Luca Toni, World Cup winner.
Oh yes, Luca Toni. You were going to bring up Massimo Macaroni as well.
I love all these obscure Italian ones, even not so obscure Marco Di Vaio, all these kind of guys.
Marco Di Vaio, who had a great career at Salernitana.
I want to give a shout out for Adriano as well, just because of his Pro Evo days.
Just put him on his left.
Just get the ball and shoot.
But I'll call it research. It wasn't really. It was a pleasure to look back and just go Rary's YouTube videos last night. But so many Adriano's goals were literally he gets the ball, he takes a shot, he takes a touch, he puts it onto his left foot and he smashes. It didn't matter where he was on the pitch, and he just put this absolutely cannon drive towards the goal. The
collective fear of the opposition.
And hearing even like Ibrahimovic talking about him, how he wanted him, he demanded that he stayed at the club. I think it was at Inter at the time together, it was AC at the time together, and but he always feel like he could have done so much more because he was just an absolute beast of a striker. It's just but one of those that it'll always have that memory, if only for Pro Evo alone.
So to finish off, pick one striker from that whole list of people we talked about, the one that really stands out. Actually, we'll just call it the not Batistuta round because I think.
No, you've killed it.
Finish it up. You know what? I'm going to say that the guy who sums it up for me is Piero Inzaghi, just because of his outrageous celebrations.
Yeah.
The 2007 Champions League final, second goal hits his back. He acts like it's the best goal of all time. That sums up Inzaghi for me. That sums up Italian strikers for me.
You had to run that off, didn't you?
Yeah.
Obviously, if this is a non-Batistuta, that he's the one for me. I'll go a little bit off kind of from the norm. Vialli for me, just for the amount of overhead kicks that he scored.
Yeah,
was just. I remember as a kid wondering how the hell he could do that and fell on my ass so many times in the garden trying to copy him. But that's for me.
And Ronan.
Yeah, given Batistuta's off the table, I'm going to go with Totti for the reasons I mentioned earlier. Just this, the Roman flair and the commitment to the cause that is pretty much unparalleled during his time in Italy. So I'm going to go with him.
I'll go Christian Vieri. Very interesting fella. Now runs, I think, he's involved in some fashion ventures now with Paolo Maldini. Very, very interesting on and off the pitch, which is where we'll leave it before we say anything that we shouldn't say. But you can still tweet in any suggestions you want of players that we may have missed out on. We're always going to do that because there's such a collection of strikers in Serie A at the time. But anyway, thanks for listening in. We're going to just play the little sound of Gareth Bale trying to speak Spanish.